So thanks very much for the invitation. Thank you to the Chamber for organising this today, and welcome to everyone. I hope it's a very informative and an engaging session. I'm absolutely sure it will be. Our agenda in terms of the city has obviously been rocked for the last 18 months of COVID, and it's been a difficult time. But one of the things that's really come through loud and clear, not just from residents, but from businesses, is that the long-term vision and aspiration that we have for Edinburgh hasn't changed. We still want to be a greener city. We still want to be a fairer city. We still want to be a city where business can thrive and grow locally and build that resilience. And one of the key things that's come out of the last 8 months is that concept of business resilience, not just in terms of the things that have really been difficult in the context of COVID and Brexit and other aspects of labour supply and a huge number of other things, and nobody will underestimate how difficult that has been for business right across Edinburgh and right across Scotland. But the resilience of environment and the resilience of what it means to operate within a community is also ramped right up the agenda and the consciousness, I think, of businesses. And the thing that's really changed since certainly I became a councillor in 2012, when the world was still dealing with the financial crash, is that there's a real understanding amongst businesses and the need to embrace that agenda to build that resilience. The Climate Compact is something I want to use just the limited time I have to welcome you to upsell, because we're building through that, and the Chamber certainly linked into that, and a whole host of strong partnerships across the city are linked into it, in terms of building that blueprint that businesses need to help arm them with the facts, with the support, and with the information to get to the position of net zero. We are still driving towards a net zero target by 2030. That's going to be a hugely ambitious, hugely difficult target to hit. But we've already seen our festivals, for example, set out how they're going to do that in the next 9 and a bit years. We've also seen other industries really embrace this agenda and start to take the actions that are needed. And green tourism is one of the things that's really enshrined in the tourism strategy that we approved literally weeks before the world went into lockdown. And while there are tactical changes we'll have to make in terms of how the city develops and gets to the position that we want to get to, that long-term ambition, as I said, hasn't changed. We still want our economy to be greener. We still want our industries to be greener, and tourism's no exception. There are some fantastic examples of businesses in the city really leading the way on this agenda. When you think of Johnny Walker and what they're doing, they've started from scratch and built a real sustainability agenda throughout their entire business offering. And we know that so many other businesses across the city are doing the same, because when you look at the numbers of green accreditations within the city, 55% of Scotland's green accreditations are in Edinburgh at gold level. I think 14.5% are our total national share. So Edinburgh is punching above its weight in this agenda, because our businesses are absolutely understanding that component of resilience that's needed and driving that through. So I'm absolutely sure that while this has been a challenging almost 2 years now, and we saw an enormous success in our sector in 2019, what we are seeing now is, in another way, the city's macro resilience kicking in. Our footfall figures in last month were commensurate with February 2020. So our city centre, while it's fragile and no one will, again, underestimate the challenges that businesses face or the real impact of major retailers like Fraser's and Debenhams and others that were on Princess Street collapsing, the footfall figures show that the people of Edinburgh are there to support. The people of Edinburgh want to enjoy their city centre and all the component parts which support not only an international tourist offer, but a local visitor offer, so that people, whether they live in Leith or Lisburn or wherever they're from, are still looking to our city centre to get things out of it. And we've seen the diversification of the city centre in order to allow us to do that, and real destination in streets like George Street through the pandemic, with so much enjoyable outdoor and thankfully during the summer sunny space to enjoy. As we build the long-term future for streets like George Street, we can continue that ethos and make sure it's a destination that's worthy of the people of Edinburgh's time and dollar, and also the people who are coming from the rest of the UK and abroad. We can build a real green offer, and I'm absolutely confident that the business community in Edinburgh gets it, understands it, and is really embracing this agenda. And if businesses are looking for more information, they're looking to sign up to really drive that agenda within their own spheres, then the Climate Compact, which the Climate Commission itself has developed, is a really great place to start. We've seen a huge appetite for businesses that were looking to sign up to that. So welcome everyone to the event today. I very much hope it's productive, and I hope you take quite a lot out of it to help drive this agenda forward, because we are totally reliant on our businesses, on our communities and our residents to get to that net zero position, and we all need to club together as Team Edinburgh in order to do it. So thanks very much, Liz.
Thank you very much, Adam, and thanks for joining us from Scotland House in London, as you're doing a good job selling Edinburgh at the London Property Conference. So that was really good of you to join us. Before I actually get started, could I also give a warm welcome to Kakanuma, I hope I've got that name correct, who is joining us. He works with the International Affairs in Kyoto. So thank you very much for joining us, and also welcome to our consuls who've also joined us this morning. But thank you very much to Adam. I know Adam's done a huge amount of work and been heavily involved through SIG, which is the Strategic Implementation Group for the Tourism Strategy, making sure that tourism is supported in the city as we start the real recovery process. EcoGen, who's the tourism consultants, have been working on the strategies, produced a very, very good report. So we're now looking at a collaborative model to ensure that tourism and in the industry really begins to prosper as we come out of the pandemic, and make sure that we contribute to the city's economic recovery. I know Donald Emslie, one of our panelists this morning, has done an amazing job ensuring we continue to have resource and support for the sector. It is amazing the amount of work that's been going on in the background that probably people will never see. But you know, I think there's a huge amount of thanks to go to a lot of people who've been doing a huge amount of work for this. As Adam says, though, alongside recovery, we also have to focus on delivering a net zero carbon city by 2030. And collectively as an industry, we have to play our part, as daunting as this may feel at this moment in time. But sustainable tourism, sustainable and inclusive tourism is a cornerstone of the 2030 tourism strategy. So somehow we've got to marry recovery and sustainability at a time of great challenge for many businesses in the sector. But you know, just to remind ourselves, tourism pre-pandemic provided 36,000 jobs for the city, 1.4 billion to the economy, and supported an extensive supply chain. It is one of our most important sectors in the city. Yet at the moment, we've got 30% of tourism and hospitality businesses facing the risk of insolvency. And today, actually, we see the end of furlough, the start of repayment of deferred costs like VAT, the change of the VAT rate, start of repayment of COVID loans, at a time where peak season has just come to an end. We're facing labour shortage and supply chain challenges. So, you know, we're not without our challenges at the moment, but I think as a city, we have got a lot to celebrate. We're a city with enviable assets, our natural heritage, the built environment, our vibrant pre-pandemic nighttime economy, and we're a safe city. And interestingly, in 2020, we were in the top 20 cities in the world for the most livable city. And we were also in the top 20 cities in the world for well-being, if we look at indicators like health, happiness and access to green spaces. And in fact, we are the greenest city in terms of green spaces in the UK. We're a festival city, and in spite of a lost year in 2020 and paid back festivals this year, we have 11 festivals that have been doing a huge work collaborating on a strong return, but also how they become more sustainable and support net zero by 2030. And all this, you know, our festivals and our culture is increasingly important as we face, as Adam says, our city centre challenges. And we need to drive footfall through more experiential visits. And you know, and we need to lean into the fact that international visitors are a really important part of the jigsaw puzzle. So we do need to square the circle of bringing international travel or supporting international travel that seems to conflict slightly with sustainability. And I'm sure Gordon will touch on that later. New technologies that we don't even know about yet, I'm sure will be the solution. So hopefully we can have a good discussion around that later as well. So I'm keen that we do kick off the event, keen to hear from our three panelists. We did have a fourth, our international speaker from Barcelona, which would have been interesting. Sadly, they've just had to step down. But our three panelists have got extensive experience of the sector and have given a huge contribution to the city's strategies and priorities, and are all very committed to supporting sustainable tourism and net zero carbon by 2030. We're going to hear from our panelists who will talk for about 10 minutes each, and then hopefully we'll get into a good discussion, because I think that's always where the interesting part of the events come from. And I can see a few faces I know, so I'll be picking on people, so try and get something prepared in advance. We'd allocated about an hour and a half, but with one speaker down, depending on the discussion, we may finish in the hour, so it'd be nice for you all to have half an hour of your day back. But let's see how things go. So I'm delighted to welcome our speakers. We've got Gordon Robertson, who's Director of Communication Sustainability at Edinburgh Airport. Gordon was also Chair of Marketing Edinburgh, sadly no longer with us, but he was Chair of Marketing Edinburgh between 2013 and 2019, so has got real insights into the city's tourism. And I'm also pleased to say that he's a board member of the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce. We've got Andrea Nicholas, who's founder of Green Tourism, which is a certification programme working across UK, Europe, New Zealand, Canada, Africa and Scandinavia. So great international insights from Andrea. Andrea also a climate commissioner for the City of Edinburgh. And then we have Donald Emslie, who's chair of the Edinburgh Tourism Action Group, a hugely experienced non-exec, but also a strong background in hotels and hospitality. So I'm going to kick off with Donald, actually. I know you don't have any slides, Donald, but if I can just welcome you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thanks, Liz, and good morning, everybody. And thank you for inviting me along to speak to the session today. And I'm sure it will be a really enjoyable and informative session. As Liz has said, I'm chair of ETAG, which is the Edinburgh Tourism Action Group, and it's the organisation in the city that brings together the businesses across the visitor economy within Edinburgh in a partnership. And we support businesses to develop new and innovative products, seek out best practice, and collaborate to ensure that Edinburgh competes with other tourism destinations. And you've heard a bit from Adam and Liz about how successful the previous strategy was over the period 2010 to 2020, and particularly across the pre-pandemic year of 2019. You know, the visitor economy was heading toward 2 billion annually, which is a huge part of the city's economy, and as Liz has said, provides many thousands of jobs directly, but also through the supply chain. So it is a critical ingredient to the success, economic success of Edinburgh. In terms of numbers, we were the most visited city outside of London in the UK, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it, but the international dimension of tourism in Edinburgh is very important. The benefit of the ETAG Association is that around the table you've got the national agencies of Scottish Enterprise, Visit Scotland, along with the City Council, and organisations big and small, and we all come together with one purpose: to work together to make Edinburgh a great visitor experience, and to support each other to make the businesses stronger, more resilient, and relevant to the consumer in today's marketplace. And I think one thing that has changed overwhelmingly in the last 18 months, and I'll talk a bit about it later, but consumer attitudes are changing, and there's much more interest in what cities and businesses are doing to be more sustainable and environmentally friendly, and visitors undoubtedly will begin to vote with their money and their feet about where they make decisions to go in the future. I think before we get into the debate, it goes without saying that the operators in this sector of the economy have seen their businesses devastated through the impact of COVID-19. And at the moment, even though there were real positive signs across the summer, the industry is still in survival mode and facing many problems. Liz has mentioned a few of them, but the visitor numbers, while encouragingly growing from last year, are still down on the pre-pandemic years. We're facing staff shortages, rising costs, end of furlough, beginning of loans to be paid back. But there's still real positive attitude about the future. And everyone I speak to in the industry is talking about changing how they operate, looking at product development, and realizing that the consumer values have changed and are likely to change further, and that the business has to change to reflect this reality. As Liz said, I took on the role of the chair of ETAG just at the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, 2 months before shutdown in March of that year. And since then, there hasn't been much advancement on the actions identified within the strategy. However, one of the guiding principles was to adapt our approach by working to make tourism work better for the city. Fortunately, within the strategy, rather than set out specific actions, the whole design of it was a framework of guiding principles that could be amended. As Adam said, we might need to make tactical changes that would achieve a better outcome for the city. Now, this is all very helpful in this post-COVID world, as we now need to focus on the key priorities, really, of people, place, and environment in all the work and actions that we begin to undertake as we move forward to support the CEC strategies around net carbon. ETAG, as an organisation that collaborates, will collaborate even more around these key principles to enable the tourism industry to go on this learning journey, because it is a bit of a learning journey. A lot of the businesses in the tourism sector are small, don't have big corporate resources, and ETAG will work with them and partners to increase their knowledge, their understanding. I think, as Liz mentioned very briefly, I think we need a common language in this space. There needs to be a real piece of work done so that all the businesses understand what this means and what the starting point is, where some audit work needs to be done to say where are the tourism businesses in terms of their carbon footprint right now, and what are the goals to be achieved and the staging points to be achieved over the next few years. And ETAG's role will be to support the industry in this learning journey. We've done it before in the digital space, working with the industry to develop their digital capability and to let them see how that would benefit their business. And I think, given that we've done it before, I think we can do it again in this particular space, and begin to help the businesses understand that there's a competitive advantage for them in moving along this continuum towards net carbon, and being able to communicate that strongly to their consumers, because in all of the research that we did in terms of developing the strategy for 2030, it was clear that consumer preference about supporting businesses that were more environmentally friendly was very clear indeed. So there's no doubt that ETAG needs to play this central role in bringing the industry and partners together in order to collaborate to improve their knowledge, understanding, and begin this journey towards net carbon. I think the industry realizes that it has to change. One of the key principles of our strategy was to become good at managing the impact of tourism. When I took over as chair, the agenda in the city was all about over tourism and how tourism was affecting the city to its detriment. But we need to work with everyone in the city, from the residents, the communities, the World Heritage organizations, in order to make sure that as we recover from this pandemic, that we make sure that tourism is on this journey, not only to net carbon, but to responsible tourism. And we're already starting a lot of work as far as that's concerned. And shortly on the website of ETAG, there will be additional landing pages put up about what responsible tourism could look like. And the three driving aspects of this will be everything to do with how we help businesses improve their environmental impact from the products they use in their business, how they deal with the waste, what energy sources they use, and making sure that consumers understand what they're doing. Part of that will also be about the journey towards net carbon, but increasingly, and I think as the City of Edinburgh wants responsible tourism to embrace, is fair work, so that people who work in the industry have a living wage, and fair work includes consistent hours and a general understanding of when they will be working, rather than just contractual working and net zero hours. So all of that work will begin. Liz mentioned that I've been working hard on resource, and I'm pleased to say that through all this hard work from the team at ETAG and in the city, we have now got resource to be able to support us in this journey. Scottish Enterprise is going to dedicate resource for one person on half a week to work on net carbon and fair work. The City of Edinburgh and Scottish Enterprise together is secured resource for us for a full-time person to work on all of the actions to do with delivering the 2030 strategy, and ETAG will continue with its resource about business engagement around all of these key aspects in terms of how business collaborate together to develop their strategy for the future. So while it's been very difficult over the last 18 months, and it's all been about making sure that the businesses can remain resilient, as in surviving to get through to this period where we can begin this recovery journey and go forward to support Edinburgh in its quest to be net carbon by 2030. But I must stress, I think we need to balance the realities against these ambitions, because businesses are struggling. They are hanging on to the window ledge by their fingernails in some instances. And I'm sure, and sadly, we will see some casualties over the next few months. But I think Edinburgh is well placed to become an exemplar around many of the tourist destinations around Europe and the rest of the world about how we can manage the impact of tourism and move forward to this ambition to become net zero. Thanks very much, Liz.
Thank you, Donald. I think there's some really good points in there that I think we can pick up on in the discussion later on. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to introduce Andrea Nicholas, who's founder of Green Tourism. And, you know, picking up on some of the points that Donald mentioned, that sort of starting point for businesses. There's so many SMEs who just don't know how to get even started. So I think having had a chat with Andrea and a brief look at some of the slides, I think it'll be an interesting presentation. So handing over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everybody. Can someone just confirm that you can see my slides? Yeah, brilliant, excellent. Good morning, everybody. Yes, thank you. That was an excellent introduction from Adam and from Liz, and also from ETAG around what the city needs to do. What I want to talk to you today is about maybe some of the bigger trends we're seeing in tourism, and also how green tourism is addressing some of that, and how we've worked with destinations to help with net zero, helping people towards sustainability. For those people who don't know what green tourism is, we have actually been around for 25 years. We started in Scotland, working very closely with Visit Scotland, and we are internationally recognised, having done thousands of assessments, not just in Scotland. We took it outside Scotland very quickly, across the UK, and we're now operational in 22 countries across the world, with 2,500 certified businesses. The majority of those are actually in the UK, 800 are in Scotland. Actually, nearly 100 of those are actually in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is the second greenest green tourism city in the UK after London. And we work with all types and sectors of businesses, from the smallest micro one-man band right up to the largest hotel chains like Dalata, and all of the associations that are in Scotland as well. So wide variety of experience. And we also work with destinations. We're still working very closely with Visit Scotland, so we're working with them on the net zero pathway. We're working with them as a partner on the UNESCO Trail, which was launched back in July. And through those two initiatives, there is funding coming down the line, probably to be announced sometime in October, that will help businesses engage with sustainability, look at their net zero approach, and help them get recognition for what they're doing and help them on the journey. The way green tourism works, it is certification, but we have a set of criteria, a framework that businesses can use, and it's based on 3 pillars of caring for people, caring for places, and caring for our planet. And within those 3 pillars are 15 goals, split into simple, understandable, approachable, accessible topics. The people section, as you imagine, is very much about engagement with staff, engagement with suppliers and with visitors and guests. Supporting the local community, again, fair wages and health and well-being of everybody, and engagement and inclusivity and diversity. The places goals are very much about promotion, protection, conservation of the destination, the cultural experiences, the local food and drink, encouraging businesses to use more of that and promote it to their visitors. Slow travel or low carbon travel, and biodiversity. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about net zero targets through biodiversity, through supporting nature. And then the planet goals, very much about energy and waste and water, reducing people's impact on the natural resources that we have in the world, and very much about helping them towards net zero. But it's not just about net zero, it's the whole gambit of sustainability. And as businesses work through this framework and provide evidence on what they're doing, they get scores and points and whatever, and that helps them to achieve either a bronze, a silver or a gold award for their sustainability efforts. And as I said, a lot of it, not just the planet goals, do touch on the net zero and reduction of carbon impacts, not just of themselves, like Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but also what their customers and their visitors are doing, which is Scope 3 carbon emissions. We have a team of technical team support, assessors and advisors. All of them are trained to environmental qualifications, and that provides support, advice. We do webinars, and as I said, 25 years of best practice and hundreds of case studies. So we've got a lot of background and experience. What we've seen over the last few years is some significant changes in travel, even before the pandemic. There's been a surge in the kind of interest in slow travel, carbon neutral trips. We've seen new tour operators that come up that are no fly or low carbon, or just carbon measurements of tours and holidays, and then using carbon offsetting tools to help make that trip carbon neutral. Definitely an interest in like well-being and health, the local, wanting to live like a local, support the local community. Single-use items obviously is a big issue because it was big before COVID. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we've now got everything is shrink wrapped and single portions. But there are initiatives out there to look at how we can provide better options for that rather than having to use plastic. Transformational tourism is a fairly new concept, and it's about the fact that visitors are saying that they want to leave a destination better than when they arrived. So actually want to get involved with sustainability and environmental projects whilst they're on holiday or visiting, and supporting that local initiatives. And the new kid on the block, if you like, is regenerative tourism, which you'll start to hear more about. And that's actually more about how within a destination you can use the examples of how nature and natural ways of supporting and helping businesses and helping tourism prosper within a destination, but with a lower impact on the residents and the destination that they're in. Another initiative that's arisen, actually started just before pandemic, was the tourism declares a climate emergency. You might want to look into this. It's now got over 300 signatories across the world. Visit Scotland was the first national tourism agency to sign up to it. It's a public commitment to develop a climate action plan, cut your emissions, work together. It's free. Anybody can join it. An individual, a DMO, a company, and we've actually got a toolkit on our website which shows you how to get started, step-by-step guide on how to make your declaration. And again, that's a way of promoting it. And there's quite a lot that Tourism Declares are doing linked to COP, and Visit Scotland have got an initiative with them as well around the Glasgow declaration, but we won't mention Glasgow, we're in Edinburgh today. And as an example of how a template's filled in and how a business can then use that to promote that commitment to their visitors and their guests. So there's been travel trends, and those travel trends have continued. And in some ways, if there's anything good that's come out of COVID, actually it has moved the sustainable tourism agenda on in our experience by probably about 10 years. So post-COVID, it was nice to have. Yes, it's a bit of a niche maybe still in some areas. It's something that some destinations were taking very seriously, especially because of things like over-tourism. But actually, that's now been embedded in sustainable tourism strategies, policies, forward thinking. And even the consumer research that's been done showing that even during COVID, people were conscious of that the impact that man has on the environment. And I think it's something that's come out of COVID, is that we now feel more like we're part of a world family, because we've experienced things here that has been experienced by people all over the world. And that connection between people and the planet and health, I think, has become a much, much bigger trend. And I think that's something that we're going to see going forward. You know, big, significant numbers of people thinking it should be part of that economic recovery. And that reputational risk, if you're putting profit before people, is a big issue. And interesting enough, we've seen a massive interest from the meetings and events professionals saying that when they come back, and they are starting to come back, that sustainability is a key part of that. And I attended the UK Inbound conference a couple of weeks ago, and it was a hybrid event. There were still 250 face-to-face people there on the day, but then a week later they had hybrid B2B meetings. And I think that there's going to be a need to change the way, to rethink hospitality and tourism, about how we do that, embracing technology where we can. But interesting, hospitality and tourism is probably one of the one industry that's going to really struggle to become a proper hybrid or virtual business. We all know, probably within our own organizations, that people are happy to work from home. In fact, they want to work from home, and that's something that can still be done through use of Zoom and everything else. But you can't have a virtual hotel stay. You can't have a virtual restaurant experience. You can't have a virtual visitor attraction experience. People have tried it, and in fact, France had a great initiative during lockdown where they opened up all of their visitor attractions and did do virtual tours. And that may be one of the options for the industry going forward, that you do have virtual experiences, but that then attracts people to come back, hopefully off season. There's definitely been research done by Virtuoso, which said that actually something like 80% of visitors are actually looking to go off season, out of height of season, because they believe there'll be less crowds there, so therefore they feel safer. So I think there's going to be a massive need to rethink hospitality and tourism. There's a big discussion at the moment around volume versus value, and actually, do we want the volume to come back, or actually should we be looking more for the value? I think there's also an interesting around blended tourism, so whole lifestyle, because people are working from home, actually they're looking at taking holidays close to home but away from their house, so they can have a different space and experience and go to local restaurants, but actually they're staying in hospitality businesses. So there are different ways of thinking about how we can approach the new norm, because the industry in Scotland, well, across the world, obviously, but in Scotland particularly, has really suffered. The lack of international travellers has been a massive hit, and there's many tourist attractions that are going to really suffer, and that international tourism market isn't going to come back to where it was for a long time. I sit on the STA Council, and what I'm hearing for the other membership organisations like ASVA and ASSC is that actually it's going to take probably until 2023, even maybe later than that, before industry the hospitality and tourism business start to feel that they're back on track. So I think that we've got to think about how we can come back better, build back better, build sustainability into it, and actually think about different ways of doing tourism and hospitality. One of the big challenges that we have is that actually businesses often don't know where to start. They don't know how to get going. It's a big topic. I mean, even just using the term net carbon zero puts people off because they think, I don't know what that means. Hospitality businesses generally don't employ sustainability managers or energy managers. They're very focused on their service to their guests and looking after people. And so it's new for them, and it's something that that industry has a way to catch up possibly with other types of industry. So we like to approach it as a very simple, like, what are you already doing? There's probably lots of things that businesses are already doing that they haven't thought about. They haven't thought about the initiatives that have been implemented by maybe even individuals within their business. But there are some very quick wins that can identify significant cost savings. Just looking at lighting, for instance, LED lights have been around for many years now, but lots of businesses still have halogen light bulbs, whether it's back of house or in big areas where they haven't thought about it. And actually replacing the LED lights, the cost saving, the payback is within weeks, if not months, and there's a significant amount of money to save. Simple things like maintenance, and even in your own house, how often do you clean the coils at the back of your fridge? If they're a bit dusty or a bit greasy, then your fridge will have to be working, or freezer will be working harder to cool it down, and therefore it'll be costing you more to run. Just understanding how quickly the water, the flow from your taps and showers, and the simple way of doing that is using a bucket, putting the shower on top flow for a minute, measuring the water that comes out of it, and then identifying how many litres per minute that is, and then you can put in a new type of shower head that reduces the flow and significant amount of savings. I put in the one flush policy. When I'm talking about sustainability, it all comes down to toilets at one point or another. And this is actually an initiative that I saw at Juries Inn many years ago. They shadowed their housekeeping staff when they were cleaning the ensuite toilets in their hotels, and they were flushing the toilets between 5 and 10 times every morning. That sounds extreme, but actually, they're going in, flushing it, putting some product down, flushing it, cleaning it, flushing it, and the supervisor would come along and just for luck, one flush. So they introduced a one flush policy overnight. They did retraining with their cleaners. They looked at their products to make sure it was possible to do that. And overnight, they saved across the chain £70,000 on their water bill. So there are significant changes. And just carrying out simple audits. What is in your waste bin? How often have you looked in it? Is there waste in that bin that didn't need to be there? Food waste is a big issue. We're doing a big project with Zero Waste Scotland at the moment, around food waste and helping people identify it. And just by being more aware within that project, something like all of the businesses reduced their food waste by about 30%. So awareness is a significant part of it, and providing support and helping businesses to do that. I've just again give some simple examples here on how things can be reduced, as the aerated shower heads. I mean, it's £188. That's 3 nights accommodation for that B&B. The Torridon switch to dispensers, good quality ones. It didn't affect their star rating, but again, saving massive amounts of plastic bottles. And Britannia, the halogen bulbs I talked about earlier, they've changed them all to LED and actually are saving significant amounts of money a year, not just first year, but every year that's going to their bottom line. And as I mentioned, sustainability is not just about net zero. Net zero is important, and actually biodiversity is a big part of that, because biodiversity can actually sequester carbon, so it is all part of that process. And there's some great examples of how businesses have engaged with their visitors on nature diaries, accessibility, promoting local, and that local, I think that initiative about local is really important, and I think that's something that encouraging local residents and local people to use local facilities, getting them to come on holiday or visit and support the local businesses is definitely a theme we've seen during lockdown. So it's really important. Now, the Climate Commission has been mentioned a couple of times. I'm just going to give you a brief overview. It was set up again just before COVID. So we had one meeting before lockdown started. It was set up to be an independent body to help advise and support and give experts information to help the city, not just the council, but the city transition to net zero. It's about catalysing actions, coming up with innovation, engaging and empowering people and organisations to do more and to exchange best practice. And in the middle of last year, we announced our Green Recovery Plan. Unfortunately, because of COVID and because of the sensitivity of the hospitality industry being shut down, that there wasn't a mention of hospitality and tourism within that Green Recovery Plan. I'm on the commission, and it will be next time. There will be something that comes into that, and I'm making sure that sustainability in tourism is a key part of that. And also that sort of scope 3 of the fact we have visitors and travellers that travel to the city, whether it's visitors or workers that come to the city, they all have a carbon impact, and I think that's something we need to be bearing in mind. And Adam mentioned the Climate Compact, so I'm going to put a picture in there as well. It's a great initiative. It's not dissimilar to the Tourism Declares, but it's very much about Edinburgh and helping, oh sorry, that shouldn't say compact, I should say Climate Compact. And again, it's about being transparent about what you're currently doing, publicising information publicly on what you're doing to reduce your climate impact, getting involved with regular blogs. So these are the current signatories. We meet on a quarterly basis to share best practice, to talk about the issues, talk about the challenges that we're all having, and to share success and to share best practice. But we've also recognised that there's a lot of SMEs. These are obviously reasonably big organisations. So there's actually a version of the Climate Compact that has been developed to provide advice and support for SMEs. So it covers all angles. And I would encourage you to look at that on the Commission's website and sign up and get involved, because I think it's a great way of helping Edinburgh work towards that net zero targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Gosh, that was a whistle-stop tour of some of the changes that we're going to have to lean into and embrace. I think some significant changes ahead, but thank you very much for that. Gordon, I saw your logo on that list of people signed up to the Climate Compact, and I know you've got some great stories to tell about the airport's approach to sustainability. So can I now hand over to you, please?
Yes, thanks, Liz. Yeah, we are proud members of the Compact. We joined, I think, around May this year, and it's been a fantastic group, very supportive. It's a great ideas exchange, so we found it really valuable. And like Adam said at the beginning of his presentation, he gave a kind of, I think he called it an upsell, so I'll join him in that and say that I think any business that wants to know a little bit about sustainability and be part of a group of businesses that are thinking about that, I would recommend joining it. It's certainly been really valuable for us, and we really value our membership. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm very thankful that we're actually having this debate. I think it's an important one to have. I think we seem to be at the start of the debate, but I think it's something that it's very good to talk about. So as Liz said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the airport, not too much. I want to talk a little bit about our approach to sustainability, and then maybe as both speakers before have talked about the recovery, and I want to talk a little bit about our thoughts about how aviation can play a role and how we are thinking about it, and maybe some ideas for the future. So I'm Director of Communications and Sustainability at Edinburgh Airport. Edinburgh is Scotland's busiest airport, and as Donald said, like much of our travel trade colleagues and businesses, we've had a torrid time at COVID, and we're beginning to recover, but we're at the dizzy heights of minus 60% passengers at the minute compared to 2019. So we're back to about 40%, which makes the airport feel a little bit more like an airport. I have to say, for a long time, in the past 18 months, it's just felt like a warehouse with closed up shops. But we're slowly coming back, and we are trying to forecast how best to understand that recovery. And it's going to be difficult. I think the recent relaxation from the Scottish Government means that we've got a bit more clarity on that, but we're looking at that quite closely just now. So as Donald said, Edinburgh Airport's the second biggest gateway for international visitors in the UK outside London. So 2019, around about 2.4 million international tourists came through Edinburgh Airport. And Edinburgh, for many, is their starting point for their journey to Scotland. We have been on a bit of a journey ourselves in terms of sustainability. And really, for an economy on the tip of an island off the northwest coast of Europe, travel is essential. Aviation is essential, whether that's connecting with family or making business links or cargo supplies or freight. It's essential. And the connectivity that's created through that brings a whole lot of things with it. It brings employment, economic wealth, migration, cultural diversity, global influence, and competitiveness. And yes, as well, it allows holidays and enables tourism. And all of those things are utmost importance to a country like Scotland, both now and in the future, and in the period when we recover from the pandemic. So as a result, our sustainability strategy places sustainability in that context, which we think is acting for the greater good, which is the name of our strategy. And it's built on a simple premise that Scottish aviation must be sustainable in order for it to continue to deliver the benefits that the country derives from connectivity without compromising future generations. And for us, sustainability is a more rounded concept than just the environment. For us, it involves linking environment, society, and economic issues through collaboration, innovation, and partnership. And very much like Donald and Andrea talked about, collaboration for us is at the part of it, because no one group can solve this problem alone. So we all think that we have to work in concert for the greater good. And our sustainability strategy reflects that. It's built on 4 pillars. Zero carbon, as you would think, is the first pillar, and that is our plan to get to net zero by 2040. There's some milestones in that where we want to reduce our Scope 3 emissions by 70% by 2030. Now, we are currently carbon neutral in Scopes 1 and 2, which is fantastic, and it's a great news, but that's only 3% of our overall carbon footprint, which is made up mainly of Scope 3, which is the indirect emissions from the airports. That's people travelling to and from the airport, a little bit of the air travel, and the landing and takeoff cycle of aircraft, and a whole lot of other things. So that's our focus for the next 20 to 30 years. The next pillar is enhancing Scotland. So that's understanding that we are a gateway, and we have a responsibility to our tourism and travel sectors to make sure we deliver the best service and help them as much as possible. Our third pillar is to be Scotland's best business. We already think that we're Scotland's best airport, and we want to look beyond that and say, well, how can we create the best jobs that we can? Because if you look at sustainability and what does an airport look like in 2050, it has to create jobs to attract the best people. We have to create career paths. We have to make sure that we're training and developing our staff in the best way and be a great place to work. So that's where we're focused on that. And the last one is to be a trusted neighbour. You know, one of the downsides of an international airport is that we are noisy and we do affect some communities. So it's working with them to manage and mitigate that noise. But also it's the benefits that we generate. How do we share them better with our local communities, and how do we understand our communities better? And like Adam said and Donald said, how do we fit into that place and make sure that we are contributing as well as we could be? So that's how we structure our thinking around sustainability. And you know, as I said, it's important because we believe that a strong aviation sector providing great connectivity is for the greater good of Scotland. So, as I said, we were proud when we announced the strategy at the beginning of the summer to announce that we were carbon neutral this year, and our intention to be the first Scottish airport to build a solar farm on our grounds. I think actually we're the first airport in the world to build a solar farm of this scale within the perimeter of our airport, right at the end of our runway. And I think that's really important because a lot of strategies are written and then sit on the shelf and gather dust. And what we want to do is demonstrate action. And we were happy to use that to launch our strategy a couple of months ago. So in the first few years of the Greater Good strategy, we're going to fire through growth that really took us 10 years previously. So in a little over 2 years, and I think Andrea was right, we're not going to get back to 2019 levels till around about 2024, we think. But if you think in 2 years, we're going to go from 1995 levels to 2024 to 2019 levels in a time that took us 10 years before. And in that time, in that challenge, we have to make sure that we get there better than we left it and with less carbon. And that's really where our plan is focused. Less carbon and enhanced engagement and collaboration with the city. So we have a plan, we have commitments, and we kind of have an idea of trajectory. But what is the role of the aviation industry in supporting the return of tourism, and what do we think about green tourism? So, well, in terms of Edinburgh Airport in Scotland, our recovery will be important to many people and businesses. The people and businesses that Donald and Andrea have kind of talked about in their speeches. We're a facilitator. However, the challenges before us are too big and require a collective approach. So a cleaner and greener future is a goal that we all share, and it's incumbent on us all to play our part. So why is this important? Well, it would be easier for us to think that we should prioritise a recovery and recovery alone. And I totally agree with Donald that we are all on our knees. I think there was a phrase used the other day there, we are breathing, but we're not living yet. And I think that's very clear across the business. So we could really place sustainability on the side in a box marked nice to do, but just not now. And we could do that, but we won't, and we're not doing that. Because as we begin to face the first shards of light in a potential recovery from COVID, we should really be looking at how we recover better and how we plan to tackle the immediate recovery and then the years beyond it. And I'm sure you guys do too. Too often, I think when an airport or an airline or a travel agent or a hotel or a tourism business talks about sustainability, the first thing we hear is but aviation, followed by a number of reasons and preconceived notions about why all aviation is bad or wrong. And at Edinburgh Airport, you'll not be surprised to know that we don't really think that's fair or reasonable or even smart, where aviation is so important for so many things in our society. And where we know that solutions for carbon-free aviation are being thought about and have a horizon between 50 and 30 years. We also think it's particularly unhelpful if you propose a tax base or punitive restrictions in a single country like Scotland in an international market that has the most transportable assets of all, aircraft. But ignoring the problem or underplaying the challenge will not work either. And incidentally, I think the Council Net Zero Plan, which is a fantastic piece of work and I think gives us a really good roadmap to hit ambitious targets that we should all support, does do a bit of underplaying the challenge because tourism is only really mentioned 5 times in the main document, and I know there's a separate tourism document as well. And the plan doesn't account for tourism emissions, whether that's tourism from Fife or tourism from Germany or beyond. What the industry needs, and perhaps what Scotland as a country needs more than most, is a bridge between our current carbon-based technology and our hopeful carbonless aviation future. And a bridge that minimises our impact in surprising and welcome ways. So what might a bridge to the future carbon-free connectivity look like? And we don't think it needs to be that complex. but it does need to be widely supported and embraced. For example, imagine this concept. Let us all, Scotland's tourism industry, Edinburgh's tourism industry, take responsibility for some of all of the aviation carbon emitted while our customers were in the air. Now, we know that airlines can't take all the pain by themselves, and why should they when we all benefit from what they do? But that burden is surprisingly small if it were shared wider. Our calculation is less than £5 per head per European passenger at current carbon prices. So let's say that over time we would find ways to collect funds to meet that carbon so that every passenger flying into Edinburgh could do it carbon neutrally. We could then go further and we could say that not only would we meet the cost, we would generate some of the most exciting carbon reduction schemes right here in Scotland and in Edinburgh, schemes that show leadership that other countries might want to follow. We could create that concept by setting a higher value of carbon for a travel trade scheme that would help others invest in projects that would otherwise not happen, say 30 or 40 pounds per tonne of carbon saved against its current market value of 20 pounds. Now that might seem a strange and kind of ethereal thing when you can't get your arms around it, and it could be criticised as another offset scheme that people say just avoids the problem or kicks the can down the road. And I think I do have some sympathy for that argument, and certainly at the airport we have a emissions cutting strategy first before we go to offsetting. But I think if the projects we invest in Edinburgh, and we can go and see them, and we can audit them, and we can ensure the results, then that's different. If they begin to start to solve problems that no one else has got the answer to, then that's different too. And if it brings a true measure of consistent, rational and grown investment, when we make rational and measured Edinburgh-wide decisions to focus on reducing true emissions rather than posturing, then I think that works as well. So what might these projects look like? So of course they could be tree planting and rewilding of Caledonian forest and peatlands, which is well-trodden path. But they should absolutely include all the projects that we could make economically sensible and get us close to net zero on our own sites and our own business, which is one of the strong arguments for our planned solar farm at the airport. And this could go much further. What about investing in solar panels for schools or hospitals? What about heat pumps or insulation for council and affordable housing that may otherwise never be addressed? What about direct investment in decarbonising research in Scottish universities and businesses? As long as aviation and tourism is attributed the benefits of carbon savings, this would be really meaningful. This would be a true bridge to a carbon-free aviation future as the new carbon-free aviation technology is developed in parallel. The reason we're excited by this and believe it could have a real impact is that we hear target after target being announced with ever-reducing timeframes on net zero delivery. But the list of practical interventions and projects is remarkably short because there simply isn't a focused, revenue-driven strategy with an aligning concept that we can all get behind. So we want to try and change that conversation, to try and take a lead and map out a greener way of travelling. Let's change the debate that says the next sentence that follows, what aviation, be about the initiatives and the suggestions that we've all come up with to let Edinburgh achieve net zero status and lead the thinking and perhaps in Europe and beyond. And to me, that's a picture of what green tourism in Edinburgh could look like as we transition to a net zero economy and the exciting future and technologies that that brings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Actually, I think we've all just been blown away by that. I think you're right. You know, there's been lots of strategies, fewer plans, and little delivery up until now, and that's really inspiring to hear that not only have you got a sustainability strategy, but there are a clear action plan and some innovative ideas on what those solutions could be. So I think that's been a really, really interesting presentation. Thank you to the three speakers. I think we've all, we've all heard some fantastic presentations. I really hope that, I mean, there's so much to unwrap from what you've just said, Gordon. I'd prepared quite a number of questions, but having heard you, I feel like really we need to kind of dip into some of the things that you've just mentioned. And I'm sorry to do this to you, Alan Laidlaw, but you just happen to be right at the centre of my screen. And you're always a good contributor at these things. So I'm going to keep my questions to later to see if we can get a conversation going. I know you're neighbours of the airport, so Royal Highland Society. We talked about the festival and all the other things going on, but we, you know, sometimes we forget the fantastic story of the Royal Highland show. You know, 350,000 visitors, and we've lost it for 2 years. This year, you managed to do it, the Royal Highland Showcase, and remarkably, did it not get streamed in 85?
We're at 106 countries now. I've got a map, and it's still missing Greenland. So if anyone has any contacts in Greenland, then get them to go onto their IP and log on to our showcase website. That would be great. There's there's lots of questions in this. Andrea, you had a slide that said 67% of people will buy products that are better for the environment. I could probably find your statistic around that on food. And food, Scottish food in particular, and Gordon could probably give us a statistic similar to that in airport choices. It's really difficult to know what the right decision is, and I think a lot of accreditation and marketing is cursory. How do people actually get to the real nub of the issue to know if their airport supplier and their airline, you know, the transport company that they travel with, or the place they stays with, you know, is actually doing something about it? Because I think that's the piece. Most people want to be part of the solution, but they don't know the accuracy. I think that's part of the challenge is almost knowing where to start with credibility, because I have a real issue with, you know, planting trees in Timbuktu to offset carbon in Scotland, because I don't think it works. But we've got some issues to there. So how do we give integrity to that 67% of people who want to buy a better product, whatever that may be?
Can I bring in Gordon first, and then Andrea, and Donald, if you want to contribute anything?
Yeah, I think you'll not be surprised, Alan, that there's a big chunk of population quite cynical about airports talking about sustainability. So that's been at the front of our mind in how we communicate, how we manage the strategy, and transparency and sort of third-party assessment is key. So it's not just us saying it; it's assessed. So that's why we've mapped onto the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example, to try and give a universal view of that. That's why we've made commitments. And we'll be reviewing them, and I think that's really clear. That's why we've tried to demonstrate action rather than not. And I think it's a combination of all of those things to make sure that you're being as transparent, as open as possible. I'm equally cynical about some. I'll not name them, but you know, maybe some of our partners with planes that are quite guilty of greenwashing and think you can write a check and it just absolves you of your problems. I mean, we're really proud that our carbon neutrality, we only have to offset a little bit, basically because I've not invented fire engines that run on electricity yet, and there will always be a bit of residualness in that, but we're very clear about that. So I think it's being honest and transparent and as clear as you can, but also being clear on your measurement, what you're measuring, and communicate that as much as possible, and then have third-party scrutiny on that, so that it's not just us saying it, it's there, but it's a constant problem, and I think it will be, you know, for the ideas we've talked about here as well.
Andrea, do you want to come in?
Yeah. So I completely agree with what Gordon said. I think the thing about certification, or maybe not even certification, but advisory organisations that provide a third-party accreditation for businesses provide that framework that businesses, because they often don't know where to start. But actually, it is about the transparency. So within our criteria, those 70 criteria, more than half are actually relating to what they tell their visitors, telling their green story, being transparent, providing the information about the carbon reductions they've made, identifying the food miles of the food that they've bought. And actually, a lot of the businesses we work with are doing a lot of green things, but actually don't feel that they want to blow their own trumpet unless they've had that third party reassurance that it's somebody independent has come in and said, yes, you are on your green journey. Nobody's perfectly green. You are on a green journey. And if the businesses can be transparent and say, well, this is our target. Last year, we overreached our target this year, we think we're going to underperform, whatever, but actually providing that information for the visitors in a easily to understand information, because it's so quick when you're talking about carbon to switch people off, not maybe the experts, but the general public. But if you're using it in a way of saying, well, it's all about local food, it's all about local miles, about staying within the destination, using the local transport, all of that has got a reduction of carbon impact, even if the visitors isn't being shoved down their throat. They understand it, and the certification third party gives the business confidence to talk about their sustainability, and the visitor again confidence it's being checked by somebody independently.
Yeah, no, it's not. There are very few simple answers in any of these things, are there? So that's the thing. My video keeps going off. Apologies. Liz, if I'm all right, I'd love to ask Donald a question about current fuel issues and the fad for going electric. Old cities with tenement housing stocks and traditional cityscapes are really going to struggle with the capacity and volume of e-charging points. How are we going to make sure that Edinburgh's at the right place and that sort of thing? Because I think that's going to be a big challenge, that demand will push us towards that, and we could get it wrong. And technology is moving at such a rate that something you install today might be wrong in 2 years' time.
That's a tricky one.
Thanks, Anna. That's a massive. Can I just, before I attempt to answer that one, can I just mention that I think in your last question, I think greenwashing is a real issue for all sectors and all consumers, and I think transparency and clarity about the values of the product need to be made very aware to consumers, and I think consumers will demand that in the future, and I think we need to be aware of that. In terms of the electrification of transport, I think this is a huge issue for a city like Edinburgh, which is based on a World Heritage Site. And as you rightly say, how on earth can you get charging points into Northumberland Street or Dublin Street in the middle of Edinburgh's new town? I think the Coburn Society might have something to say about electrical charging points appearing at the corner of every street. But we're on that journey, and I think this is what I said in my little section was, we need to we're on this journey. We need to understand it. We need to develop the knowledge not only of the businesses but the consumers, and begin to develop solutions that can be fitted into new environments, but also retrofitted into Edinburgh World Heritage cities. If you look at Edinburgh, it's still a living city. There's still more people live in Edinburgh, in the centre of Edinburgh, than do in most cities. So I don't have a suggestion of how it's going to be solved, but it's a huge challenge. And we've also got to be aware that what we shouldn't do is clutter up the city with infrastructure.
Yeah. Because
I think if you look around Edinburgh at the moment with the development of the cycle lanes, I don't think Edinburgh has really, it's great to see cycle lanes, but I don't think Edinburgh has excelled in how they've implemented them and how they look. So I think there's a big issue and a big question to be asked about all of this.
Thanks, Donald. And again, just touching on Alan's first question, I think there's a huge role for eTag to play in getting smaller businesses on the journey and getting them to start their measuring and not be part of the greenwashing, but to actually find real solutions and delivery. So I'm putting a plug out there. We need to keep funding eTag because there is a massive role for you to do.
Well, I agree, because Emma said it. That a lot of businesses are scared about this because it will require investment. Many businesses might not have the resources to invest. So it's about getting them to understand that this investment over time will pay dividends and make them more competitive and more attractive to consumers. But it's all that understanding, that knowledge, that experience. You know, ETAG needs to take in partners like Green Tourism and work with Edinburgh Airport on their sustainability strategy, which we will do, about making sure that you know, as the tourism industry begins to recover, then you know we're doing the right thing by moving towards this responsible tourism.
Thank you. And I'm aware there's a couple of comments in the chat. One from Sue Crossman asking for case studies for the ETAG website. So I'll let everybody pick up with Sue there. And Ian Baxter again is wanting a survey on trying to sort of capture views of stakeholders. So that's all in the chat there. I see that we've got Paula McClay on the call as well. Paula, I know you've been kind of the author of the sustainability strategy, and we've had a discussion, you know, basically what the City Council have tried to provide is a 10-year framework to deliver sustainability and net zero for the city. The next thing is the implementation plan. And as we've all said, you know, how do we deliver this now? We've now come down to delivery. Do you want to come in and sort of make any comments about how we come together and some of the challenges that you are going to have to overcome to get the implementation plan out there and then start delivery?
Yes, if I can get my mute button off. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and thanks to all the speakers for their contributions. There are a few things I'd pick up, actually. You know, that point, an action plan without a strategy doesn't amount to the kind of coherent direction of travel, and a strategy without an implementation plan is just wishful thinking. So, you know, we're very conscious of that, but we have to stage the work that we're doing on behalf of the city to develop a 2030 city strategy. So the climate strategy that we have been consulting on, and we are listening very carefully to what we're hearing from partners about what is needed and where we want to collectively get to, will be published at the end of November with an implementation plan that is front loaded, because for some areas, you know, we the whole point of the work we need to do is develop a medium and long-term plan. So, you know, we are as a council working with key partners across the city to make sure that that gives a clear sense of action and delivery and momentum in the now, with a long-term agenda for the next decade. One of the areas I'd kind of come back to is that EV. It is difficult as a city. We you know, not just the nature of Edinburgh as a heritage and a built environment, but also, you know, in terms of where we want to be as a city for our infrastructure. We don't just want to replace every car on the street with an electric car. We want to make sure that public transport, active travel are cheap and effective, and the first and reasonable choices for getting around this city. That goes beyond the city into the region, but we have a city challenge within that as well, which is why the strategy first looks about how we come together to serve as public bodies to serve the city with EV charging hubs where we can. We learn from that what the city needs in terms of businesses and freight and other means of getting material to citizens and residents and customers around the city, what that might need. And in tandem, thinking about the growth of the city in its development. We know it's going to grow by 21% by 2045. That's a significant number of increased houses and citizens and residents coming to the city. How do we put a framework in that future-proofs the city in terms of EV infrastructure? We do not have all the answers to that right now, but what we're laying out is a staged approach to how we would understand that challenge and make the right choices. because you're right, with infrastructure, you can only make those choices once. So it is challenging, but I think the strategy is trying to lay out a journey for us rather than always pretending to have an answer when we need to learn and innovate what that answer needs to be. So, you know, this conversation today is still and taking on board what we're hearing here today as well, and it will still be influencing the strategy and the implementation plan, neither of which can be, they'll only be a point in time, because this agenda and the technology and the buy-in and the activity is growing day by day. So it will need to be a truly living document, but I hope that adds something to the discussion today.
Thanks, Paul. And I know, I think very clear from the document is that the City Council can't do this alone. In fact, no one sector can do this alone. It does mean we all have to come together to solve this. And that's why it's been a really interesting discussion. I can see there's a few more questions in the chat. So I do want to try and involve people. So Roxandra Kazan, hope I've got that right. Do you want me to ask the question for you? Question for Gordon: have you seen a change in airline travel following the launch of Travelist, founded by Skyscanner, as well as Booking.com, Google Trip, and Visa?
Well, the short answer is no, and that's probably not to do with the quality of the product. I mean, we still see lots of searches on these. We look at these all the time to see who's searching for what and where and when, because we use that for trying to forecast and trying to work with our airlines. But at the minute, travel has been suppressed because of the pandemic and the government policies, both at Scottish, UK and European level on that. The other thing is I think passenger confidence has taken a massive dent. And whilst those that want to travel are coming back, you know, we're still 60% down. So we're still waiting for that to come. And I think today is Travel App Day. All of us in the aviation industry are waiting for the Scottish Government's app to appear in the App Store, that we can all put our vaccinated details in and travel without having to have 40 forms and triplicate and all manner of tests. So I think that'll help as well. But that's been the major drag. So hopefully we will see, you know, a lot of these technologies and things being used as people begin to edge their way back to travelling.
Thanks, Gordon. If I could just sort of lob in probably a final question. What's been really interesting is the holistic approach across the speakers and the comments. So whilst, you know, sustainability is largely about net zero, it's not all about it. You know, we need the behavioural change driven by circular economy, but we also have to look at that fair work agenda as well. Edinburgh's got aspirations to be a living wage city, but we've still got 40,000 people in Edinburgh paid below the living wage, and that's from sectors largely in, as you'd expect, the care, tourism, hospitality, retail. How do we, you know, and we've all talked about how dire the current situation is, debt laden, kind of repayment challenges. So at a time when people have got to start investing in net zero carbon and people, what's the journey going to look like? How do we get people on this journey? Donald, I don't know whether I could come in with you, you know, particularly from the tourism sector. How do we get businesses up to the point where they can pay the living wage?
Well, I think if I talk to a lot of my colleagues around the ETAG full group, you know, a lot of them are saying that you know, they're already paying well above the minimum wage. And I think, you know, again, this is about data, Liz. I think we need to understand the reality of the situation to begin to survey businesses to find out how they are actually paying their staff. I think if you listen to the city and look at their strategy for the poverty strategy, it's not just about living wages, it's what the fair work, which is making sure that people are paid responsibly, but also are in secure employment, whether that's a full-time contract or a part-time contract or guaranteed
I'll
hours,
just finish this.
rather than people worried about how many hours they're going to be working next week and how much they might be paid. So I think there's a double strand to this, and I think certainly when talking to the people around E-Type table, they would say that they are not living wage employers in the main. I think the pressure on staff shortages is beginning to have an upward trend on earnings, which is good for the employees. And I think we need to work with the industry to say it's worth, again, like beginning to invest in sustainable strategies for your business in terms of energy and waste and transport. It's also the right strategy to invest in training your staff to be better trained in terms of serving your customers and your guests. So I think it's a journey that we need to get on, and I think it's not going to be solved overnight, but I think it's certainly something that we need to pay attention to.
Thanks, Donald. Andrea, do you want to come in on that?
No, I completely agree, Donald, but I think it needs to be more proactive than that. I think there still needs to be government support. The lack of workers out there at the moment or skilled workers is considerable. So more investment in skills, making the industry more attractive to work in. I think employers will have to pay more money to attract good skilled workers. But I think things like the visa plan that they've got for the lorry drivers should be extended to hospitality. I think there's, within the industry, as I said earlier, I think there's a need to rethink how we do things. It needs to be seen as a quality industry to move into. It's not just a transient thing that you do when you're a student. People need to be paid better salaries, but actually, in order for those businesses to be able to afford to pay those better salaries, they need to build back their business. An interesting research that was done recently by ASPA showed that those visitors that have come back to visit visitor attractions are showing a much higher satisfaction level in visiting their visitor attractions, because there are less people, they're having a better experience. And therefore there's a whole discussion around, should the visitor attractions be able to actually charge more, and the visitors, because their satisfaction levels are so high, are more likely and more willing to pay more. So I think there's a seismic shift in the whole way we look at tourism and how we employ people within the industry.
I just come back, Liz, I agree with that, and I think it comes to that very difficult question about volume versus value, and in terms of what is it that a city like Edinburgh should look like in 5-10 years time, in terms of the level of tourists that visit the city and the type of product that the city offers, and therefore the value that comes with that visitor experience, and the ability of the businesses being able to charge more. I run a hotel, and I've come through the pandemic, and it's been very difficult, but we're now trading better than we've ever traded, because we've limited our occupancy and put the rate up, and invested in staff training, and we're getting better customer satisfaction scores than we've ever had, and the staff are happier, the guests are happier, and we're actually making more money. So I think there is an element in all of this about having a big grown-up conversation with the whole tourism industry in Edinburgh about volume versus value, and being able to improve, work to improve the quality of the product, and therefore raise prices and share some of that benefit back with the staff.
Thanks for that, Donald. Gordon, I'm just going to give you the final word there as we're getting close to the end.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree. That's one of the reasons when we went out and talked to our stakeholders and our staff and our partners about what should sustainability at Edinburgh Airport be, this came back loud and clear, in terms of it has to be more rounded. And you know, it's a clear thing for us. Sustainability just can't be about, you know, carbon. It has to be about what kind of business are you going to be in the future as well. And if you're going to change the culture in that way, then, you know, you have to look at it across that piece. And I think one example that jumps out to me, we've just created a passenger, a customer service call centre, a small one at the airport, because we needed that, far more questions from passengers. And we used Department of Work and Pensions Kickstarter scheme to hire some young people who couldn't get jobs and were in risk of long-term unemployed. We brought them in and trained them, and it's been fantastic. So this is an example of where actually thinking in this way about training and development, about how you can reach out to people that maybe don't have the opportunities, is actually good business sense. So we pay real living wage, we've trained people, we bring them forward, and it can be done. And actually, I would stress that, and as Donald has shown as well, that actually thinking in this way doesn't need to be a burden. I think too many people approach it in the way they think, oh my God, the cost, I can't do it. But if we build it into our thinking and think creatively, then we can actually get good business outcomes as well. And I think that's an important lesson for everybody too.
Thank you very much. And I think 1 minute to go. We've made it. I mean, I think we've had a sort of a packed discussion here. Brilliant. So just kind of final words from me then. I mean, I really think fantastic, insightful discussion, and it's going to continue. You know, it's very clear that we certainly don't have the solutions yet. But I think you're right, Gordon. I think we've got to see this as an exciting journey. Not something that's burdensome, but something that liberates us as businesses and as a city, and asking the question, what kind of business do we want to be? What kind of city do we want to have? So, you know, we've got a 10-year framework with a strategy. We need to support the implementation plan and get behind the delivery. And I think, as Paula said, it's really clear we need to collaborate on that. So thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you very much to everybody attending this morning. We've got the summit. We've got another, the final of the Stepping Stone events, the end of October, which is green food and drink. And then we've got the summit 3rd and 4th of November during first week of COP. So information will be out on that. And I think that will help us carry on the discussion and see where we